webinars, we cover topics like how the MRO industry is reeling under the COVID-19 wave and how the MROs are transforming their operations to fight this pandemic. Our topic for today's discussion is fate of the grounded fleet, and we have with us our esteemed speakers, Jared Butson, who's the Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Turbine Aero. He joins us from America. Welcome, Jared. We have with us Ranjit Sarai, who's the Vice President, Aviation and Aerospace, Asia Pacific at Pune Naval. Ranjit joins us from Singapore. Welcome, Ranjit. Next, we have Mr. Amrish Agarwal, who's the Associate Vice President for Planning and Projects at Indigo Airlines. Joins us from India.
Hi.
And we have Rohit Tomar, who's the Head of Finance Department and Director of Financial Planning and Analysis at Vietjet Air. Hello, Rohit. Welcome to the webinar. A warm welcome to all of my speakers. Before we start with the webinar, I'll quickly run through with a few ground rules. Only the speakers will be visible and audible to all the registered participants at all times. The participants can post their questions in the Q&A tab, which is given below. Please mention your name and your company when you post the questions, and also specify the name of the speaker to whom your question is addressed. We'll try and answer your questions during the course of the discussion. Before we start, I would also like to add that we had over 200 registered participants from across the world who are attending the webinar. A warm welcome to all of the participants too. Currently, the entire aviation industry is hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. In the midst of this uncertainty, a simple question remains unanswered. What will it take to get the parked aircraft back into service? Currently, a vast majority of the fleet are completely grounded, with the airlines vying for suitable space to park their fleet. Although many countries are showing signs of lifting the lockdown, there is still some time before opening of the international borders for commercial air travel. Till then, the aircraft stays firmly grounded either on the ramp or the tarmac. Today, we'll be discussing the various challenges that the airlines and MROs are facing while maintaining this parked fleet and the commercial repercussions which are arising out of it. With this, I open the floor for discussion, and my first question to start with is, most of the maintenance manuals today don't cover the aircraft maintenance for shorter intervals like a span of 30 to 90 days. They are mainly focused on long-term storage. So in such cases, how are the airlines or the MROs dealing with huge maintenance demand? Who would like to go first? Amrish? Yes, please.
Well, this is a unique situation. It has never occurred earlier. We had situations where 1 or 2 or 5 airplanes were put on long-term storage. But here where the entire fleet of the entire world has been put, it is a very, very unique situation. But there are definitely solutions which are available. When this first was, when the embargo was put, it looked like a huge challenge. In terms of Airbus, there are parking procedures available from short duration to a medium-term duration, and which has helped our fleet into a good shape. I do not know about the other manufacturers because I am not dealing with them right now, but it was a challenge, but not all that difficult to handle.
Right. Anyone would like to add to it? Yes, Jared, you would like to add to it about the maintenance manuals not covering like short intervals?
Yeah, so Turbine Aero does mostly APUs, and as such, the tests for APUs normally don't fall under something separate, right? Normally the main jet engines need to be run because the dollar amount spent on the jet engines is so high that the concentration is going to be more on running the jet engines, but to be able to run those, you need the APUs up and running to be able to support it on that side. So on our side, you know, we don't think there will be a long time when the APUs don't run. Even if they're being parked at that point, whether it's a month or 2 months, at that point, there won't be a ton of damage or, you know, because they're sitting around, it's not like, you know, tires or landing gear where you might actually have some more different stress than what you'd have by flying them. With the APU, we're not overly worried about that. Our big question is, when do the airplanes start flying again, and what does it look like? How fast do they come back online? And that's a bigger question for us.
Absolutely. Anyone would like to add to it, or should we just go to the next question? Yes, Rohit. Yes, please.
You're right. It's an interesting scenario. I think what we are seeing as some of the plans is the most critical part, the two critical aspects that are getting impacted with the grounding of this fleet is ensuring that the engines are maintained properly. And now you have a mix of a Pratt & Whitney engine as well as the GTF engine and the normal CFM engine. And in the GTF engine, obviously, because it is a gearbox, it further requires much better preservation. But the other challenge that airlines have to keep in mind when you're looking at preservation of engines or lack of preservation of engines is the fact of insurance contracts. Because once you get these engines back, or once you get these aircraft back in air, if there is any incident that happens on the aircraft, which is going to be traced back to the lack of preservation, it can have a significant impact on your ability to claim insurance on any of those incidents. So I think it's a very careful situation. Airlines are able to maybe operate certain repatriation flights, keeping the aircraft back in air for some time. Every 30 days or 60 days, you sort of just run the engine for a period of time. So there are a lot of procedures in place, yes, but I think the larger picture beyond the fact whether it is mentioned in the maintenance manual or not are these two critical items.
Right. Ranjit, anything you would like to add to this?
Well, I think the complexity is added with the lack of space. So with some carriers, they're having to park fleets all over the world. And as you go into storage, you have to do the full clean and wash down, and moving spares, parts around the world in this difficult environment, especially when PPE is being prioritized, adds a lot more complexity. So for us, I think we're more so involved once the fleets are grounded, and they fire up the engines, or some carriers accelerating cabin upgrades and refurbs on the fleets as well, using the downtime, and that presents a logistics challenge.
All right, we'll come to the logistics challenge in a while. Before that, let me just cover the basics of what are the main problems that once the aircrafts are grounded. So when the aircraft is parked, we just dust off the surface and let it fly again. It has to go through certain regular periodic maintenance checks. And right now, engineers all across the world are working round the clock, running the engines, powering the aircraft, checking flight controls, etc. So I want to know, how is the workforce currently coping up with all this pressure?
So there is a challenge of bringing in the workforce inside the airport, travel through the cities. That is definitely a challenge. However, there are other challenges as well. When you keep an aircraft on a long-term storage, it is, as you said, it is not just dusting the airplane. There is something known as continued airworthiness. So these airplanes, we have to keep it in a continuous airworthiness maintenance. Otherwise, we would end up in difficulty in bringing them to the restoration or return to service. We have to be following the maintenance manuals, the guidelines, absolutely up to the brim, to keep these airplanes. Bringing in and making people getting inside the airport and working inside the airport, one thing which has come up very, very nicely is that there is a lot of cooperation between the airport operator, the regulators, the manufacturers. They all are understanding the situation which is there, and instead of posing difficult situations, or instead of posing difficult questions, they are collaborating with the operator and coming out with the solution. This is really helping us in bridging the gap and keeping the airplanes in a good shape.
Okay, anything you would like to add, Jared, please?
Yeah, on our side, I think the biggest issue that we're seeing in getting the aircraft, from where they are currently to when it comes back online is really how fast it starts to ramp up. And I think there's a lot of workforce out there that's ready to come in and ramp that up and increase that's available now. But what happens if a bunch of airlines start adding it, and the capacity there will be a tightening of the capacity at that point. And at that point, that's when we will see how many aircraft are flying, when they're flying, because if it's each region that opens up slowly, I think that can be handled. If everything opens up all at once, that would be, much bigger disaster on that side as far as being able to have the people in place to be able to support it. So I do think there's a good opportunity out there for getting the industry back up and running. I know there's a lot of people that are ready to jump in and take those steps to get that, but it just depends on how each country determines how they're going to bring back the airlines and how they're going to bring back the stay-at-home orders that are in place across the world.
Yeah, I guess it's going to be a slow transition back post the lockdown. It will be a step-by-step transition in every country. We go across to the commercial aspect of maintenance. Since the cash flow is already dwindled, airlines still need to be maintained, and under such conditions, what are the decisions that airlines are expected to take in order to survive? Yes, Rohit.
Hi, Swati. Yeah, this is. I mean, there are multifacets to this answer, and based on what has happened currently, unprecedented. We are seeing a lot of negotiations. We are seeing a lot of challenges when it comes to maintenance management planning. For example, the quick things that we have seen, unless what it was previously predicted, that is early Feb and March, where some of the markets started closing down, it was predicted that more and more aircraft would go in for maintenance and be made available for the summer or late summer. However, as now we have seen that probably the summer traffic, which is one of the biggest traffic globally, is not going to be there. And at the same time, with the kind of forward bookings going down, which is impacting the cash inflows, airlines are becoming more prudent to sort of defer maintenance plan. So we have seen deferment of maintenance plans on a large section of the fleet as we're going forward. We have seen it between a mix of owned aircraft and leased aircraft. They have preferred to sort of defer maintenance on an owned aircraft fleet as compared to a leased aircraft fleet. I think the largest impact, commercial impact that has happened is happening. What we are seeing is in the engine MRO sector. Primarily because these are very high cost engine shop visits. If you look at a average fleet of, let's say, the A320s, which is a significant number of aircraft at this point of time, you will see that these engines are currently showing the second wave of shop visit, which means these are about a 5 million, 6 million shop visit kind of an impact. And what is happening with these engine maintenances is that the risk that we are seeing right now is, because it's an industry-wide impact, it has not only impacted the airline's ability in terms of cash inflow and cash outflow, it is also impacting, the supply chain. Lessors are not getting paid. The last 5 to 10 years, you've seen SL sale and leasebacks that have happened. Majority of these aircraft are on an asset-backed financing. So there is a large amount of debt on these aircraft which the lessors have to pay. And we have seen that some of the lessors might have a risk where they do not have the MR funds that are required when an engine goes for shop visit. So that exposes the airline significantly, because you suddenly have an engine which has gone for a shop visit, the MRO has paid for it, or MRO has already done the work for it, and all of a sudden, the lessors just don't have enough funds to pay for it. So MROs have got themselves sort of open to this risk. Airlines have themselves done it. We are also seeing a sort of an analysis that a lot of airlines are currently doing between, either really doing the maintenance or cannibalizing the aircraft. Because typically what will happen as what we see going forward is the cash flows are not going to be significantly improving. Even if you look at what is happening in China recovery market, or for example, Vietnam's domestic market, what we are seeing is while the bookings are coming up, the forward bookings are still low. which means the cash inflow is substantially lower than what it should have been. And because we expect the whole period to have like a longer lead time, there is going to be an increased focus on cannibalizing engines and aircraft rather than really maintaining it. So it's going to be a very a difficult scenario. MROs would have to look at their plan again. Even existing contracts, PBH contracts, all of these contracts have come into question at this point of time.
Right. I'm sure Amrish has something to add to it.
What Rohit has said is a very candid view about the situation that is going to come. Definitely, the cash flow for all the airlines have come to zero, and it requires a very, very careful planning on part of an airline to manage the aircrafts now and 6 months from now also. I fully agree. The risks which will come through where the loss of cash will hold up the payments. But I am sure there are wise people here who would sit together and come out of the situation. So there would always be discussions and negotiations that will help us away throughout.
So Jared, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting parts. Where we're seeing our business changes, we lease a bunch of APUs, and those are all, of course, being returned back, right? If you're not flying the aircraft, you definitely don't want to pay lease fees on those. Makes sense. In addition to that, you know, the airlines we work with, if they're leasing the aircraft, right, the funds come from the lessor, and we haven't seen any strain on that because a lot of our business is cargo and military, or I should say, you know, 60% of it, and we're still seeing good, you know, payments from those customers. But our big fear is we do have a bunch of APUs that are sitting ready to ship from our shop that are waiting on cash, and whether that's coming directly from the airline or coming from the lessor, right, that there is a slowdown on that side. Now, our problem is, right, we spent the money on this now 15, 20 days ago to get all the parts in, to build it up, to put the labor on it. So the parts are ready to go. So this will definitely have a down effect, not just on us as an MRO, but all MROs, right? The last thing you want to be doing is spend money to repair something and have that sitting on the shelf, ready to go, not collecting any revenue. You can't ship it, so you can't bill it, and you can't collect on it. So I think you'll see that going more, you know, the longer this goes on, you'll see more and more of that where there's funds just aren't available to be able to pay for things. Funds for things that are needed immediately, of course, you know, if it's an AOG situation, those will be put through quickly. But depending on what it is and how many spare APUs or how many aircraft they're currently flying, you could see a difference on that side.
All right, Ranjit, I would like to have your view, your take on this. What do you think? Airlines expected to survive how?
Well, it's very difficult, right? Passengers are cancelling bookings, taking back money, airport fees, personnel, and everything else doesn't change. But I think on the resource side, there's a lot of redundancies going on. I think with that is the compounding issue of the capability. So if you're losing a lot of old experience, the restart and the ramp up is going to be a challenge. Of course, the operational aspects, you know, the risk mitigation in terms of market intelligence, figuring out what's going on. You know, there's masses of data being crunched now in terms of consumer behavior and what's going on, and ensuring the capacity is there. Does the carrier want to be the first in the mid or the last? Being last, erring on the side of caution, you could lose passenger traffic or customer loyalty. And of course, processes will be different. You know, now we're talking about the middle seat not being used. It requires a whole different assessment and a governance. And of course, again, additional work. And when we're talking about a global footprint and local topics and different rules and regs, it becomes very, very complex. So I on my side, on the transportation, we think it's bad enough, but certainly looking at it from a carrier perspective, it's mounting. It really is a challenge.
You brought about a very interesting point. You know, the middle seat not being used. Like, it's got me very curious. How is this going to work? The social distancing and the middle seat of the airlines not being used. Amrish, please, I need an answer from you on this.
See, it is not just, it is a very big question. It is not just the middle seat not being used. You cannot have middle seats for all the rows not being used. Then what happens to the front row, the aisle seat and the window seat? So it has to be aisle seat and window seat on one row not to be used and the middle seat on the next one. And that way you create that X kind of a situation. But all said and done, these are difficult to implement things. If you lose so much of seating capacity, then obviously the fares will go up. Fares going up may not be liked by the community. Community may find it even more difficult. How do you keep the airline cost down with this kind of loss in capacity? Maybe government will not come up reducing the fuel prices or taxes. So it is very, very half thought. To me, the solution which I see may not be now, maybe another 15 days, 20 days, 1 month from now, is what Emirates has started doing. They have started flights testing, doing a rapid test. They are doing a rapid test and it is a 10-minute kind of a result. And if you are not COVID infected, you can go in. Something of that sort, where the test instead of 10 minutes can be reduced to 2 minutes and we have an infrastructure to support it. Probably that may be a better solution. But this alternate seating may work only for a few weeks. It is meant to close the airline.
Rohit, I can see you laughing. Please, I need your, what is your opinion on this?
I completely echo his view. I think this, it's a half-thought plan. It's trying to be an easy fix and thinking that it is going to solve the problem. I think it is an opportunity, because what and this is my personal belief, is I think the airline industry would need to identify the perception from a customer point of view as to what really scares him of this virus. I mean, as long as you get, or so is it the fact that as long as you are able to give the perception to the passenger and the passenger perceives that he is entering an aircraft where every passenger along with him has been sufficiently checked through whatever, means and mechanisms, I think this issue might not be required. If you're able to close that perception properly, you can let go of this whole middle seat concept. I think what might, as airlines, we might need to sort of look at is the communication part, where we communicate very clearly to our customers in terms of the ability of we as an airline, that we have taken steps that we have taken to ensure that the passenger sitting besides him is as safe as he is. For example, would it, and these are just thoughts, I mean, we've been discussing this internally ourselves, is does it probably require an additional training of our crew in terms of, getting them trained more than just the basic first aid? Do we need to get them trained on handling mass hysteria inside an aircraft? Because at 35,000 feet, if you suddenly have a passenger coughing, it can create a mass hysteria inside the aircraft, and that can be a big safety issue. So do we need to improve the training of our crew to handle such situations, or communicate as a part of our safety briefing? I mean, today we talk about all the possible things that can happen to an aircraft in a safety briefing. We talk about it going into a ditch, going into water, going into this. So, well, just talk about it that, okay, if this happens, our crew is well trained to handle the situation. So I think those are the kind of things that can help build the confidence of the passenger. Keeping the middle seat empty doesn't do anything. So I mean, that's my personal view on it.
Changing the perception of a passenger. That's a very interesting. Jared, any views on this?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I had an airline ask me, when will I go flying again? Like, what's the, what opens you up to travel, right? Because that's a large part of my job is traveling, visiting customers, and being able to talk with them about it. And I think it's very difficult for me to determine it, because it has to be, the customers have to want to see me and have to allow me in the building right before I even can decide to get on an airplane. And there's just so much uncertainty on when that will happen and when business as usual will be back. And once it comes back, what does that mean for me for travel? Because a lot of my travel that I go to do is relationship building. It's discussing things that need to happen, helping out the airline, finding out, what they're looking for work to be done. And at this point, for me getting on an airplane, does it scare me? No, it doesn't scare me. There's not a lot of people flying right now. And when that starts to make a change, that would be something that would scare me. But the airlines have to make the decision of, they have to open up their doors to start seeing customers, and they have to figure out how to get people, or vendors, they have to figure out how to, for their customers that are flying, make it safe for them. And I just think we're a long way from that happening to get back to a business as usual type of mentality, at least in the United States right now.
Yeah, true. Very aptly put. Okay, my next question is an open question for all of you, and I don't want anyone to avoid this. See, this COVID-19 pandemic is a situation for which nobody was prepared for. However, we have learned certain lessons from it. Going ahead, what will you think? The MROs and airlines are better prepared from here on for any other such crisis coming in future? I'll start with you, Ranjeet.
Well, I think government, regulatory, airlines and people, I think will be a lot better prepared for this. The future is going to be an extremely different place. I think social distancing, remote working is going to stay in place for a very long time. I think, now everyone's out there in the news, somebody made a report 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago. And I think industry as a whole has really, across the whole thing, even if you talk about the hotels and the people that supply the bread to the hotels, and every industry as a result of this has been impacted. I think contingency planning is going to be completely forefront of mind at the board table. I think the world will change. There'll be a lot more nearshoring or supplier diversification to make sure that not reliant on one particular market or geography. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. No more.
All right. Yeah, step by step. Next, who would like to go? Yes, Amrish, please.
See, you cannot deny the learning, but it is such a unique situation. You learn for this situation, and you do not know what will be the next situation. Yes, definitely one learning which I can see in this whole scenario is austerity. We would be forced to look into austerity. We would be forced to look into our pockets. This growth which we had seen for past couple of 4 or 5 years, at least in Indian aviation market, probably we had become too much spendthrift. So I think the biggest would be the cost control that would be looked into, and it would be forced on us to look into, even if we don't want to.
Oh yes, that was one thought that crossed my mind when I framed this question. Rohit, any inputs from you?
Mine would be a little longer one. Really sorry for that. I think the lessons are for all the industries, and I'll start with the government first. I think especially if you look at the Asia Pacific side of the market, I think one of the learnings of the government is they can't boast about huge air traffic at low costs without creating a sustainable mechanism for these low cost carriers to weather these kind of storms. Very simple examples, what I mean to say is, things such as as monetization of slots, making slots as an assets. I mean, a low-cost carrier burns money, builds up a slot, builds up a traffic. But in times like this, and I'm speaking from a finance perspective, that value of the slot is not an asset that can be used by the airline to raise any capital. And the governments have a lot of countries have been hiding behind the fact that, well, this is owned by the government. It's a sovereign property. Yeah, it's a sovereign property as long as someone is flying it and we have invested money in it, right? So I think the governments cannot enjoy the benefits of providing mass transport at low costs and not provide a back-end system or a mechanism by which these investments of the airlines have an ability to be protected. From the airline perspective, I think a lot of things are going to change. I think the first thing that's definitely going to change is the force majeure clause in all the contracts. Is it an act of God, or is it something which is completely determined by a government? Because this is a scenario which, God forbid, can happen at any given point of time. And how do contracts handle these is going to be extremely critical. I think from an airline perspective, again, the second learning has been that, the asset light model has really come to question because the assets do play a very important role when you're trying to raise debt in a situation like this. So, I would see more and more investors of airlines trying to push airlines toward a mix of owned assets and leased assets rather than just pure, leased assets. Obviously, the second thing is going to be how the airline is really going to make the whole operations function. Because if, as a passenger, I want my aircraft to be disinfected before every time it takes off, you're adding at least 20 minutes to the ground time of the aircraft, which reduces the utilization of the aircraft. So those things will come into play. I wouldn't be surprised if we will see a sort of a modification in the lease contracts, which is going to give flexibility to the airline, where in a case like this, the lease rental liabilities is significantly reduced. So I think that's going to happen on the airline side. On the MRO side, interestingly, it has, my belief is that the learning for an MRO business has been that MROs would need to invest in creating, diversified sources of revenue for their business. If we are only going to work on the fact that, I will have an aircraft which comes in for a C check, I'll perform the work, send it back, it's not a business that's going to hold water during these kind of situations. So I think for MROs and I now generally think that after post-COVID, you would have MROs as a business line, but I think the real value is going to be a business which will be called as MMSP, which is Maintenance Management Service Provider. It is no more just a maintenance repair organization. It's a maintenance management service provider, where the MROs have to become the part of maintenance management. And when I say management, I'm referring to cost management, planning management, schedule management. I think all these factors will come in. So whichever MRO is really able to up the game and move or diversify the business to become more of a maintenance management service provider rather than just being an MRO would really cut the game.
Wow, maintenance management service provider, that's an insight. Yes, Jared, being an MRO, you think this model will work?
It's interesting. I mean, I think there are a lot of different things, right? So one is, of course, diversity for us as an MRO, right? So we want to make sure we have commercial airlines, we have military, we have cargo, right? So spreading it out across the board, right? That's sort of a longer play, right? You can't just go and say, oh, I want more cargo work now and grow that business, right? So building up it and having it spread out. So, right, if one goes down, you have the ability to take it across the other ones. Right now, it seems as though cargo and military is, full speed ahead on both of those sides. That's great. One of the biggest things that we're struggling with, and it was brought up before, is, shipping APUs now because there's no extra airlines flying flights. So getting an APU onto a flight is now costing, where before it might have been $2,000 or $3,000 US. Now it's $10,000 to $15,000, right? And having those built in and having ways to move that around, right? So also having a global footprint of having facilities in different parts of the world so that you're not reliant on shipping from one spot across the world, because if you try to do that, it just becomes too difficult on that side. And I also think, for us, one of the biggest things that we've seen change for us is our trader and broker market. And that trader and broker market is going from where they send parts in to get them repaired so that they can have them ready for the airline. Now things are showing up and they want them done immediately, right? Because the traders and brokers aren't spending the money to have those on the shelf ready to go. They're waiting until there's a need for them. And then there's a huge push on our side to get it done as quickly as possible. And there's no way that we can defend against that unless we build up a huge spares pool to be able to support those customers and make that happen. And so it's a big change in the industry, not just the airlines changing, but the traders who are normally the ones that can find those parts for airlines and help meet their needs to keep aircraft flying in a quick fashion. Even that's changed. So I see over the next 4 to 6 months, there will be a big change that's happened where you'll see longer wait times on parts just because no one's been spending the money proactively. And that's something that had happened in the past, and to provide that. And so for us, it's looking at all the different business avenues and making sure that, while we support the airlines and find ways to do that, we're not always direct from MRO to the airline. Sometimes it's through a lessor, an aircraft lessor. Sometimes it's through an engine lessor where we're working with them on it. And sometimes it's, direct through brokers. So there's a lot of different ways that we support the airlines to be able to do that. And that is going to change, and there'll be a dramatic change to that over the next 6 months, depending on how many brokers are out there and traders and what that market looks like at that time.
Yes, I'm sure both Amrish and Rohit have to say something to this. So please, one by one, go ahead.
Rohit, you have to say something?
Go ahead. I'm good.
See, cost definitely would be the major player in time to come, and I fully echo what Rohit was saying. It is when we are writing the contracts, till now when we were writing the contracts, force majeure was a kind of contract which was there, and we never bothered to look into what was force majeure contract and what would it bring in, what value it would bring in. It was just a formality. This was a real eye-opener for me, at least, when we thought that how is this force majeure going to help us? And we found that bulk of our contracts, this force majeure was not helping us. So reviewing the contracts is one of the biggest priority for everybody in time to come. And whether it be an airport operator, whether it is an airline, whether it is an asset management company, everybody would like to review these contracts to the best, because these kind of events, in my opinion, will happen again and again.
Yes, Rohit. You want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think I was just listening to what Jared was saying, and he's so right. I mean, if you take it from a government perspective, what Jared said is actually the opportunity that we're talking about. The right point that he said is they will need multiple distribution, multiple storage points from where these inventories can be shipped. So the whole centralization of inventory from a geography perspective has come to a question, because if you have everything centralized, and if something like this happens, there is absolutely no way you can sell the inventory. I think governments and I would like to say definitely for India should take a cue on this, to say this is the time we need to back up our MRO industry, so that we have enough ability to service the needs of our airlines domestically. Because, I mean, imagine even if the domestic service starts tomorrow, and if tomorrow you need spares which needs to be shipped from Germany, and if the airspace is closed, there's no way that you can get the spares. So the fact of building the ecosystem within your own country is an idea that they really need to start thinking about. And this is the time of opportunity, because a lot of large companies who have suffered in their business because they were too centralized would take the opportunity to set up locations, strategic locations in other part of the countries. And you know, whether it's sort of a joint JV between the government and airline and these service providers, but you would see an opportunity here. And who capitalizes on this opportunity and how is really going to be a question.
All right, taking your cue from, you know, centralization of inventories, I would like to ask Ranjit as to what are the logistics problems that are arising currently due to all this grounded fleet. Ranjit, are you still there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. No, you need to unmute. You need to unmute before you start speaking.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry, bit of a lightning strike on the house, so I lost internet. Okay, so for us, it's and you know, I wouldn't want to be cheeky and say that we prepared ourselves for this, but in our life, you know, we're dealing with airlines, OEMs, MROs. So for us, it's always been an area of focus. So for us, is obviously having a network to get product from A to B, and not relying on one particular mode of transport. So over the last few years, we've developed sea air solutions, overland, train, and obviously different types of product solutions, whether they're time definite that come at a premium, or whether they're more economical and serving let's say a schedule bill. Obviously, having secure capacity is paramount. So, you know, having a partner that can or has allocations with a preferred carrier partner program ensures that you have access to last-minute capacity. Obviously, intelligence and benchmarking is very important. Many of the airlines, MROs, OEMs operate the same market. It's not one airline or one customer that needs a solution on that route. So having a large provider that has a wide footprint allows you to be assured that, you know, the intelligence is there. So when you ask for a route study or what have you, the information is already available and the due diligence has been completed. In this day and age, data mining is huge, so planning and forecasting. So, you know, through technology platforms, we can give our customers real-time access on the whereabouts of assets. And let's take an engine stand as an example. If there's an AOG somewhere, and let's go to the extreme and call it a remote site rescue, an engine gets shipped in from somewhere on a stand, but if it's the engine OEM that's responsible as part of a care agreement, let's say, it's also their responsibility to get an engine stand there. Now, an engine stand could be in a very different location. 6 months ago, it was easy. It'd take a day or two and you would have it all organized and everything done. The future with the reduced capacity means a very different logistics challenge. And for the customer, the operator, it's not their issue. So, you know, short of chartering left, right, and center and driving costs through the roof, it's very, very difficult. So agility and visibility is very important to be able to track assets through there, and then borrowing from partners and others will become part of the ecosystem as it matures. And of course, communication, being able to stay on top of what's going on real time, whether it's a vessel in the ocean or a truck going across European borders. Those are the sort of things that we're looking at.
All right, moving on to the next question because we are really running out of time. There's one very important thing when I read today when I was researching for these grounded aircrafts was climate, which is an important factor when it comes to parked aircrafts for a long time. Now, in countries like India, where there is a lot of humidity, it can corrode the parts and damage the interiors and whatnot. So, how are the airlines and MROs dealing with such problems which are really not in their control? Yes.
Should I? So you have touched a very, very important subject, that how climate is playing a part on the aircraft storage, and we have such wide kind of climate. Swati, you just mentioned humidity. It is not only the humidity, it is the hot weather as well as high winds. That is also a very, very big challenge to these parked airplanes. Humidity to a certain extent can still be managed by sealing the aircrafts. Aircraft left on the tarmac over a long period of time, and the hydraulic pressure would not be there, it would be bled away, your ailerons and flaps would be drooping. You know that in month of May, the wind velocity in areas like Delhi picks up very, very high, and you would have unattended airplanes, you would have trussels which would be lying all around the airport, which would have been used and they would be left unattended, or trolleys. These are immense, immense danger to the airplanes. They would move and can hit the airplanes. We have seen it when the airports were fully occupied and fully operational, and I really fear what will happen when we have such kind of a static situation where the airplanes are kind of unattended, or there is no manpower or little manpower to address these airplanes when the storms hit. Similarly, you would have, probably it would be in one of your questions, you would have birds and snakes and rodents entering into the airplane. That itself also will be a very, very big problem.
All right, Jared, how is the situation there in America? Like, as an MRO, how are you coping up with these problems?
I think there's different realms of airlines, right? So you're going to have the airlines that are paying a storage fee, and part of that storage fee is to make sure the aircraft run every day and that they're moved, and that so you don't get the flat spots on the tires, and there's something that happens, right? So there are airlines that are doing that. Then there are airlines that are in the middle that are sort of, they're still doing as much as they can with limited budgets to be able to try to be able to keep those up and running. And then you have the airlines that were borderline making money before this hit, and now they're closed their doors. We're seeing a lot of that in Latin America, right, where they're just closed, and what they're doing, those aircraft, is highly questionable, never mind what their fleet is going to look like afterwards. So there's going to be, for us, we see it as both an opportunity because we are an MRO, and it's not necessarily that for us APUs are going to all of a sudden stop running, right? So if you park an APU for a month or 6 months, right, it can still run fine after that. But it's going to mean a lot of shop visits, and a lot of time on those shop visits, that's when you find other things that are going on. So for us, for a long time, and as planes change hands and they go back to the lessors, that drives more inductions into our shop, right? So while it's quiet now, when the fleets do get back up and operational again, there will be a surge on the MROs, and some of it will just be quick tests, where we just do a test and certification on it, and some will require a little bit more, but there will be a surge on our side that we will see.
And what about active maintenance? Like, I read somewhere that some of the operators are keeping the aircraft on active maintenance currently. So do you think it's feasible under current condition when, industry is already cash strapped? What do you feel?
I mean, we're seeing it all over the board, right? So some people are paying, some aren't, right? And there are places where we are just slow paying when the economy is good and planes are flying. There are just customers that slow pay, airlines that pay a lot slower than other airlines, right? And the push that put on us, it was tighter, because if you're already extending someone 90 days, 120 days, and then all of a sudden now they're not going to pay you till who knows when, right? That's where you start to have problems. And that was something that I think before it was, okay, we know we're going to get paid we know that the airlines are making money. Now we're questioning whether that airline's going to stay in business or will ever make a payment to us until they get back up and full operational. So I think there's a lot of question marks out there of what it's going to be and when the airlines come back. How big is their fleet? Are they going to full operation, or are they just going to be flying, 6 aircraft when they have 12? And maintaining 6 is a lot easier because they can steal the parts from the other 6 that aren't flying, right? And so what does that whole dynamic look like as we start to get back and ramp up to full speed, and what that looks like?
Correct. So since we're talking about cash flow, everyone agrees that cash flow is very critical, to sustain the aerospace and defense companies. So how do you think these companies are securing and managing liquidity? Like Rohit, maybe you can take this question.
It's a very touchy subject. Liquidity at this point of time is very, very sacred. Yes, I think what we are seeing is that almost all the countries have asked government for support in some way or the other, either be it in direct liquidity or not. I think the question that we have to be sort of looking at is what is going to happen once things start coming back online. And that's when the question really becomes interesting. Because what this whole COVID thing has done globally, and not just aviation industry, because when you look at talking about liquidity, you're talking about liquidity for the overall market. There are a lot of asset classes that have opened up as better and safer returns as compared to aircraft. So, aircraft as an asset class, aviation as an asset class had certain risks, but also had certain amount of returns associated with it, even if it was investment in MRO. If you talk about MRO business, the investment or the liquidity that was going into the MRO business was happening based on the expected demand in the region. That is what was really driving the investments in MROs. When you undergo such kind of a financial crisis, specifically if you look at, let's say, an MRO industry, which is a servicing industry, the first thing that we would sort of start seeing is that the investments will be driven not by the demand, but by the scale of the supplier. So the bigger you are, or the bigger scale that you have, scale either in terms of geography, in terms of how much you can provide as compared to your competition, that is really going to drive investments. So because the investment will start flowing towards, let's say, a monopolistic, duopolistic kind of a market scenario. So smaller MROs, which are opened up in different locations, our individual holders will find it extremely difficult to raise capital. As you know, I mean, majority of these MROs that have come up in the last 5 to 10 years have huge debts on them because of the cost that are incurred in terms of construction, tooling, and other stuff. So, and working capital loan from an MRO perspective, and that's why I said previously that MROs would have to look at revenue diversification, because working capital loans would become dependent on the ability of the business to have diversified revenue because of what has happened in COVID, because it can just completely shut down a line of your revenue. So diversification of revenue is going to be critical. Scale of your MRO is going to be critical. So if you ask me today if MROs are going to be looking for liquidity, which they are, this is the right time to join hands and collaborate rather than compete. Because only when you collaborate and build bigger scaled businesses would you be able to get through this.
To Ranjit, your views on this?
Well, I think, where do I start? For me, I can carry on all night, but it's collaboration is going to be the key. And today there's a lot of competition. Yeah, when you look at governments, companies, individuals, and organizations. But there were some countries many years ago, 2 decades ago, that were looking at collaboration throughout the entire supply chain. Whilst it's not fair to say that it doesn't happen at the level that it should. So I think, open exchange forums, and I think you ask, will it be a different industry? I think, a lot of these events that you host, like you host, will not necessarily be pointing outwards and saying, well, what is government not doing or what's industry not doing? It's going to be a huge section of it's going to be contingency planning, what happens in the event of. And I think in terms of collaboration, code sharing is going to be a huge topic. There are some carriers that do it quite extensively, but others don't. I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Somewhat,
In a
yes.
loose way?
What do you think? Yeah. What do you think, Jared? This collaboration of MROs will work going ahead? And what happens when the situation is back to normal? Like, what happens to all these collaborations then?
Yeah, I think the collaboration, for us, I think there's enough competition out there in the market right now with MROs, at least in the United States anyway, to provide it. There's enough competition to be able to keep that flying. Now, if you were to say main jet engines, I'd say no, there's going to be a huge strain on those, and there's really not enough space, right? Those are booked out years in advance. And if you're increasing any of that input, that's going to cause problems, right? APU wise, right, that's not going to be as big of an issue as they work through. And I think it really just depends on what part of the aircraft you're talking about and what part you need to get flying. The other big thing is how many aircraft are going to start to be retired. And as you start to look at more aircraft being retired, like right now, you're seeing a lot of the 767s, 757s, those fleets are just getting retired instead of anything else. So there will be a lot of parts available out on the market. That'll be a good thing. But I do think there will come a point where, supporting customers will be a dual base. And so whether it's, going direct, whether it's through, a broker market or through one of the big, for us, it'd be like an AJ Walters or a GA Telesis or someone that's going to provide a power by hour to that aircraft that's providing that funding on it. Those guys are the ones that you'll work through to be able to support some of the airlines across the world on that side.
All right, I'll take the last question of the day since we are almost up on our time. Parking charges seems to be yet another important concern. So can you expect any help from the authorities or government or regulator in this regard? Like, how is this parking charges problem getting? Yes, Rohit, will you like to answer this first? Yeah. Since I saw you laughing very loud when I mentioned this.
Sorry, but it is, right? It's a fantastic point. But I would really like to say this as a part of an airline. We have seen tremendous support from a lot of airports. I think airports have been, and I can tell you this from our operations, be it Hong Kong Airport, Singapore Airport, Bangkok Airport, Taipei. All these airports have really come forward and provided, in whatever way they could, certain rebates, discounts, reduction, you can call for it, for the parking charges. And that was very, I think that's very well accepted, and we really appreciate all these airport operators who have given us this. Yeah, there are certain airports who still think that it's their right to keep asking the parking charges, but I think that's hardly one or two, not many, at least not in our operations we have seen. So I think parking charges will continue to be a point of debate once operations start back, because you have to understand that one of the highest capital investment has really been in the airport sector. We've all loved privatization of airports, which was very important. But that privatization has come on the back of huge dollar value or huge dollar debts. So I think the airports are equally under pressure. The non-aero revenue side is always been, we think it's going to still be a challenging part, duty-free coming into difficulty. So I think the non-aero revenue is going to be a big challenge for airports, which is going to push them to, towards airline to start recovering some amount of aero revenue. So I think there's going to be a tussle back and forth. Some places we will win, some places they'll win, but yeah, I mean, it's like in a way it's like fuel, right? I mean, I can't keep the aircraft in there. I have to land it somewhere. So I can't live without it.
Very true. Amrish, your take on this?
In India, Airport Authority of India has to play a very, very important role in bridging this gap. They are the majority stakeholders for the own majority of the airports, and they are stakeholders in majority of the airports. And the Airport Authority prevents from private operators to come out and reduce tariffs because their revenue gets hit. And this, as goes for the previous question, I would say that the collaborative approach would work in it, because the airplanes would be sitting on ground. The parking charges are very heavy. It is going to be an additional cost to the airline. Airline will suffer. And if airline is not able to pay, airports will suffer. So they have to look into it, and Airport Authority of India, being a father figure, has to take it forward by looking at lesser revenues. They are cash rich. They can afford to look at lesser revenues for next 1 or 2 years and help the airlines in this.
All right, Ranjit, what do you have to say about it? Like, how is the situation in Singapore?
I think there's not too much parking going on in Singapore. One, the weather, there's typhoon coming through. I know that Australia, which is the nearest point for us, Alice Springs presents a great opportunity, and then obviously heading more towards Europe and even North America, depending on the fleet. All I know is that our airline customers with about, let's say, 2 to 250 mixed fleet are looking at probably about $10+ million for a 6-month period. And I think, the challenge is where runways like Schiphol have been used, where, they've used every inch of ground space they possibly can. When it comes to firing up the engines and turning the wheels, the tires, that's going to present a huge complex issue as well. So from a logistics standpoint, there are certain companies that specialize in tires and jacking equipment that will do very well out of this. But yeah, beyond that, I don't have any other comment. Cool.
All right, Jared, your view on this?
Yeah, I don't have a lot on this. I mean, I can say, if you talk to especially the airports in the desert, a lot of aircraft are being parked there, right where it's dry. You don't have the humidity on that side, and they're already set up for it. That's where all the aircraft teardowns go. You see it in Victorville, California. You see it in Arizona, where we're located. There's a lot of different places, Goodyear or Marana, that you can park aircraft. And I know a lot of those places are already full. Plus the airports, every time you drive by an airport, there's aircraft parked randomly everywhere on that side. But I don't have too much to add other than that.
All right. So I think our time is almost up. I'll take very quick closing comments from all of you. Let's start with Ranjit.
Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about industry and logistics and everything else. But I think one of the most important factors is the human aspect. And when you look at, cancellations of new fleets or new aircraft delivery, and many of the crew, flight crew, cabin crew, ground crew have been trained to handle those. I think the dragging out of existing assets over a longer term create a little bit of a challenge. And whilst these aircraft are grounded, the pilots have to undergo so many checks in so many hours. How do they do that? So, beyond the physical assets themselves, it's the people thing that's a major concern. And that, I believe, is high up on the radar with some regulatory bodies actually giving some dispensation or, let's say, exemptions, particularly in the UK with the CAA. That's it.
All right. Rohit, some closing comments from you?
Thanks, Swati. I think my closing comments is a little overarching kind of a statement, which is, I mean, this COVID scenario has really proved that the air transport industry requires every government, every country really needs to look at its own ability to service all the air transport needs. Especially, I've seen it, at least in India. I've spent all my years there. I've seen that, there have been challenges between, an airport like Mumbai or someone else, big airports saying, well, I always have a slot for an international flight, so I really don't care two hoots about a domestic airline. But it's scenarios like this that really say that the infrastructure that you build has to be enough and supporting the domestic consumption that you are trying to do. If I am having an air transport, it should be strong enough to meet the domestic demands. If I'm having the ecosystem, MRO, airports, they need to come together through either rules, procedures, or certain baseline economic fundamentals by which all of them work together in a scenario like this, where they're completely disconnected from the international world. And whichever government is able to get their players together is really going to be, for me, the sort of learnings, will provide the learnings. How Singapore provided it maybe in the 1980s of how to really build an ecosystem. I think it's time for some country to stand up and build an ecosystem within themselves, which is completely self-sufficient. Unfortunately for Singapore, the challenge is their whole traffic is dependent on international traffic. So I think it's time for someone like in India. China has done it significantly well, but I think it's time for a lot of countries in Asia Pacific, definitely as an opportunity to build that ecosystem together in collaboration through some economic fundamentals.
All right, Amish, what do you have to say about this?
See, this is such a situation that I don't see. I see a loss of capacity for next at least 1.5 years to 2 years. People will travel less. There would be less business to travel. The leisure travel will absolutely be minimal. Hence, the capacity which we have today will be grossly unutilized. This will be leading to a bloodshed. There would be people who would be laid off. There would be airlines that would shut down. There would be businesses that would not become feasible. Looking at it, this will also give us time to prepare for the next big wave when we grow again at 8%, 9%, and 10%. So as Rohit has been saying, that domestically we need to look our domestic market, our domestic support, our domestic MROs, that we are less dependent upon the international support to sustain. That I fully agree, and India per se should be working towards this as a next 2-year or 3-year goal, and this lull which is there now should be used as an advantage to build up for the next couple of years.
All right, very aptly. Are you next? Yeah, Gerard, your closing comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, scary to not know when we're going to start flying. I think that is something that could change, right? Where it could come on board this summer. It might be October that we, start to see flights increasing again. But, it is a year or two before we're back to full capacity. If you just talk to people that don't travel all the time, that go on vacations, they're not going to be flying as much, right? They're not going to go to the flights that they normally take on vacation each year. They may change what they're doing on that side, and that'll be a dramatic effect on the airlines, which means that it'll change what's happening. But I think there's still opportunity. So whether it's getting the aircraft back up and flying, if it's retiring a certain amount of aircraft, if it's changing hands, like aircraft that go from one lessor or from one airline to another through a lessor, there's lots of opportunity in there for the MROs to provide that support to be able to keep the aircraft flying. So while we might lose out on the total capacity where there's a lot of aircraft flying, I think there will be opportunity, to help support airlines by moving aircraft from, one operator to another and figuring out, what's the best way to make that work. And right now it looks like the way that cargo is going, that with cargo increasing and keeping that capacity, that market's going to stay strong for a very long time, if not increase over, the next few years. So what we lose on one, we may gain on another. Will it equal each other out? Probably not, but at least there's opportunity out there to be had.
Yeah, perfect. All said and done. Like the aviation industry currently is facing many problems. Economic tsunami that is predicted to follow this post-COVID phase. Now, I think is the time for all of us to come together and to face this pandemic with a united front. We can do that by pooling our knowledge, our resources, and by helping each other in the times of need. The aviation industry has not faced such a big crisis since its inception, is what I feel. But we are slowly coping up, and I'm very sure and I'm positive that this way we will all definitely emerge successful in not days, but at least months or maybe years to come. In our next webinar, we'll discuss the role that latest technology like additive maintenance, predictive maintenance, blockchain, etc. is trying to play to help sustain the MRO operations in the next few years. Don't forget to register for our next webinar, which is the 4th in the series, and it's scheduled for 7th of May, which is next Thursday, same time. I thank all of my speakers and the participants for joining us today. I'll see you next week with yet another interesting discussion. Till then, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.